In 2019, every single farm in Hadley County, Kansas lost their crops. Every single one, except for one. A 73-acre plot of land that belonged to a woman the other farmers had laughed at for 3 straight years. A woman they called Ditch Digger Delia. A woman who had never farmed a day in her life before she was 34 years old. While her neighbors watched their corn wither into brown, crackling skeletons, while they filed bankruptcy papers and auction notices, Delia Thornton pulled in a harvest worth $847,000. And she did it all with rainwater. Free rainwater that every other farmer had let run off their land for decades. This is the story of how a grieving widow with zero farming experience revolutionized agriculture in one of America's most stubborn farming communities, and why the people who mocked her eventually came begging for her help. To understand how Delia Thornton became the most unlikely farming success story in Kansas history, we need to go back to March of 2016. Delia was living in Portland, Oregon. She was 34 years old, working as an environmental consultant for a mid-sized engineering firm. She had a small apartment with too many houseplants, a cat named Chairman Meow, and a life that was fine, comfortable, predictable. She hadn't been back to Kansas in almost 15 years. See, Delia grew up in Hadley County, but she left the moment she turned 18. Her father, Robert Thornton, had wanted her to take over the family farm, the same farm his father had worked, and his father before that. 4 generations of Thorntons had coaxed crops out of that Kansas soil. But Delia wanted something different. She wanted college. She wanted cities. She wanted a life that didn't smell like fertilizer and diesel fuel. Her father never forgave her for it. They spoke maybe once a year after she left. Awkward phone calls on Christmas. The occasional birthday card with nothing but his signature. Robert Thornton was a proud man. The kind of proud that looked a lot like stubborn. The kind of stubborn that felt a lot like silence. When he got sick in 2015, he didn't tell her. When he went into hospice, he didn't tell her. Delia found out her father was dying from a lawyer's letter, informing her that Robert Thornton had passed away on March 3, 2016, and that she was the sole beneficiary of his estate. She didn't even get to say goodbye. The estate, as it turned out, was a mess. Robert had been struggling for years. The farm hadn't turned a real profit since 2012. There were equipment loans, a second mortgage, and 3 years of unpaid property taxes. By the time the lawyers finished explaining everything, Delia realized she hadn't inherited a farm. She'd inherited a $340,000 debt attached to 73 acres of dying land. The smart thing to do, the obvious thing, was to sell it, pay off what she could, walk away from the rest, and go back to her life in Portland. Her mother, who had divorced Robert when Delia was 12 and now lived in Florida, told her exactly that. Sell it and move on, honey. There's nothing for you there. There never was. But something stopped her. Maybe it was guilt. All those years of silence, all those missed opportunities to reconcile. Maybe she felt like she owed her father something. Or maybe it was the photograph she found in his desk drawer when she flew out to settle the estate. A picture of her, at 7 years old, sitting on a tractor with her father, both of them grinning at the camera. On the back, in his cramped handwriting, "My little farmer, May 1989. She didn't remember that day. She didn't remember ever being that happy on the farm. But her father had remembered. He'd kept that photo in his desk for almost 30 years. Delia called her boss in Portland and requested an unpaid leave of absence. "Just a few months," she said. "I need to figure some things out." She moved into her father's farmhouse in April of 2016. Chairman Meow was not pleased about the relocation, and that's when Delia Thornton discovered just how much the farmers of Hadley County had despised her father, and how much they were going to despise her. Hadley County is small, about 4,000 people spread across 700 square miles of flat land. Everyone knows everyone, and everyone has an opinion about everyone. The opinion about Robert Thornton was not favorable. He had been, by all accounts, a difficult man. He'd feuded with neighbors over property lines, water rights, equipment loans. He'd accused the local agricultural co-op of cheating him and had pulled out in a very public, very loud confrontation at a town meeting in 2008. He'd alienated the county extension agent, the local seed suppliers, and just about every farmer within a 20-mile radius. When Delia showed up at the hardware store in town to buy some basic supplies, the man behind the counter, a thick-necked fellow named Gary Hutchins, looked at her credit card and then looked at her. "Thornton," he said, not a question. "That's right. Robert's girl. The one who ran off." Delia felt her cheeks flush. "I went to college," Gary snorted. "Yeah, that's what your daddy said. Every time someone asked about you, she went to college." He mimicked a bitter tone, like it was a disease. He rang up her purchases in silence. When he handed her the receipt, he said, "You selling that land?" "I haven't decided yet." "Huh." Gary leaned on the counter. "Well, don't take too long deciding. That place ain't worth much, but it's worth something. Longer you wait, more money you lose. Thanks for the advice. That's free. Everything else costs money, even advice from neighbors." He smiled, but it wasn't friendly. "Your daddy learned that the hard way." Delia left the store with her supplies and a heavy weight in her chest. She was starting to understand why her father had become so isolated, so bitter. This town had a long memory and a short supply of forgiveness. Over the next few weeks, she got the same treatment everywhere she went. Suspicious looks, loaded comments, the occasional outright hostility. At the diner, the waitress took 20 minutes to bring her coffee and then forgot her order entirely. At the feed store, the owner quoted her prices that she later learned were 40% higher than what other farmers paid. At the gas station, someone keyed the driver's side door of her rental car. Hadley County was sending her a message: "You're not welcome here. Your father wasn't welcome here. Sell the land and go back where you came from." But Delia had inherited more than her father's farm. She'd inherited his stubbornness too. The more they pushed, the more she dug in. By May, she had made a decision. She wasn't going to sell, she was going to farm. She quit her job in Portland. She sold her apartment, shipped her belongings, and committed fully to a life she had spent 15 years running away from. It was, by any rational measure, a terrible decision. She had no farming experience beyond childhood memories. She had no equipment. Her father's machinery was either broken or had been repossessed. She had no money. Her savings were already being eaten alive by the property taxes and loan payments. And she had no community, no neighbors willing to lend a hand or share advice. No support system of any kind. What she did have was a laptop, an internet connection, and a stubborn conviction that there had to be a better way to farm than the way it had always been done. And that's when she discovered rainwater harvesting. It started with a YouTube video, of all things. Delia was researching drought-resistant farming methods. She knew water was going to be a problem, since her father's well had been underperforming for years, when she stumbled across a documentary about farmers in India who had transformed desert land into productive farms using nothing but rainwater capture. The basic idea was simple. Instead of letting rainwater run off your land into streams and rivers, you capture it. You dig channels, build berms, create ponds. You store the water when it falls and use it when you need it. In regions with even modest rainfall, a properly designed rainwater harvesting system could capture enough water to sustain crops through months of drought. Delia watched that documentary 3 times. Then she started researching. She found academic papers from Australian permaculture experts. She found case studies from Africa, from the Middle East, from the American Southwest. She found detailed engineering specifications for swales, berms, check dams, and retention ponds. The more she read, the more excited she became. Hadley County averaged about 28 inches of rainfall per year. That didn't sound like much, less than Portland certainly, but when you calculated it out across 73 acres, it was staggering. Every inch of rainfall on 1 acre equals about 27,000 gallons of water. 73 acres times 28 inches of rain times 27,000 gallons, that was over 55 million gallons of water falling on her land every single year. 55 million gallons. And in Hadley County, like everywhere else in the region, almost all of it ran off. It flowed across the hard-packed fields, picking up topsoil as it went, and drained into creeks that fed into rivers that eventually reached the Gulf of Mexico. The farmers in Hadley County were pumping groundwater from aquifers that had taken thousands of years to fill, paying for the electricity to run those pumps, watching the water table drop lower every year, while millions of gallons of free water ran off their land every time it rained. It seemed insane to Delia, criminally wasteful, She spent all of June drawing up plans. She used topographical maps of her property, available free from the county surveyor's office, to identify the natural drainage patterns. She calculated slopes, volumes, flow rates. She designed a network of swales and berms that would interrupt the water's natural flow and give it time to soak into the soil. Her plan called for a series of crescent-shaped berms on the contours of her land, with swales, shallow ditches, above each berm to collect water. The water would pool in the swales, slowly infiltrating into the ground. Any overflow would move downhill to the next swale, and so on, until any remaining water collected in a large retention pond at the lowest point of her property. On paper, the system would capture about 70% of all rainfall on her land, storing it in the soil and the pond for use during dry periods. The cost would be minimal, mostly just earth moving, which she could do herself if she rented the right equipment. In July, she took her plans to the county extension office. The extension agent was a man named Harold Becker. He'd been in that office for 30 years, helping farmers with everything from soil testing to grant applications. He was supposed to be a resource, an ally. He looked at Delia's plans for approximately 90 seconds before setting them down on his desk. "This won't work," he said. "Why not? Because nobody does this here. This is Kansas, not wherever you got this from, India, and Australia, and, right, foreign places." He said it like an accusation. "Look, Miss Thornton, I know you mean well. You've got enthusiasm. That's nice. But farming isn't something you learn from the internet. It's something you learn from doing. And the people who've been doing it here for generations know what works and what doesn't. But the water comes from wells. That's how it's done. That's how it's always been done." He leaned back in his chair. "You want my advice? Sell that property to someone who knows what they're doing. Take the money and go back to whatever it is you were doing in Oregon. Portland. And I was an environmental consultant." Harold's eyebrows rose. "An environmental consultant?" He said it like she'd confessed to witchcraft. "Well, that explains a lot." Delia took her plans and left. She was shaking, not with fear, but with anger. She'd expected skepticism. She hadn't expected to be dismissed like a child with a crayon drawing. But Harold Becker was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, as she started actually implementing her plans, renting a small excavator, digging test swales in one corner of her property, word spread through Hadley County about what Robert Thornton's crazy daughter was doing. And people had opinions. The first time she heard the nickname, she was at the gas station filling up her truck. She'd bought an old Ford F-150 to replace the rental car. Two men were standing by the next pump, talking loud enough for her to hear every word. "You see what that Thornton girl is doing out on her daddy's place? Digging ditches, I heard. Miles of ditches. Swales, she calls them." The man snorted. "Fancy word for ditches. She read about it on the computer. Lord help us. A computer farmer. She thinks she's going to catch rainwater in those ditches. Like a bunch of holes in the ground is going to save her crops when the well runs dry. Ditch Digger Delia." The other man laughed. "That's what my wife's calling her. Ditch Digger Delia. Trying to reinvent farming. Her daddy must be rolling in his grave. All those years working that land, and his daughter's turning it into a swamp. She'll learn. They always learn. First bad year, she'll be selling everything off and crawling back to wherever she came from. Can't come soon enough, you ask me. Bad enough her daddy thought he knew better than everyone. Now we got the daughter doing the same thing." Delia finished pumping her gas. Her hands were trembling, but she made herself walk calmly to her truck, climb in, and drive away without looking at either of them. That night, she cried for the first time since her father's funeral. But the next morning, she got back on the excavator and kept digging. The comments continued. At the diner, she kept going stubbornly, refusing to let them drive her away. She overheard a group of farmers discussing her over coffee. "She's got those berms running all across the north field. Not in rows, mind you. In curves. Like she's drawing pictures out there. Contour lines," another farmer said. "She's following the contour of the land. I know what she's doing. I just don't know why. Water flows downhill. Everyone knows that. You can't stop it with a pile of dirt. Maybe she thinks she's smarter than water." Laughter around the table. "You know what gets me? She hired Billy Patterson's kid to help her run that excavator. Good money, apparently. She's paying that boy $20 an hour to dig holes. Money she don't have. That property's drowning in debt. My cousin works at the bank. Says she's barely making the loan payments. She'll be bankrupt by spring. Mark my words. Sooner than that, if we get a hard winter. One man, slightly older than the others, shook his head. You know, I almost feel sorry for her. She didn't grow up here. Not really. She doesn't know how things work. She's going to learn a hard lesson. Hard lessons are the only ones that stick. She'll figure out soon enough that you can't farm from book learning. You gotta have it in your blood. The Thorntons used to have it. Robert's granddaddy was one of the best farmers in the county, but Robert lost his way, and that girl, he shook his head, that girl never had a chance. Delia paid for her coffee and left without finishing it. The worst encounter came in September, at the farm supply store where she was buying grass seed for the berms. She was planting deep-rooted native grasses to stabilize the earthworks and prevent erosion. She was studying the seed options when a heavy hand landed on her shoulder. She turned to find a red-faced man in his 60s, wearing overalls and a John Deere cap. His name was Earl Whitmore, and he owned the largest farm in the county, over 2,000 acres of corn and soybeans. "You're the Thornton girl," he said. "Not a question." "Delia, yes. Let me give you some advice." He didn't wait for her to ask for it. "What you're doing out there, it's embarrassing. It's embarrassing to this whole community. We got people from other counties driving by to look at your, whatever you call them, those ditches. They're laughing at us." "I haven't asked anyone to look at. You think you know better than people who've been farming this land for 100 years? You think you figured something out that we all missed?" His voice was rising. Other customers were watching. "Your daddy thought the same thing, thought he was smarter than everyone. And where did it get him? Dead in a hospice bed with no one to hold his hand." Delia's vision blurred with sudden tears, but she blinked them back. She would not cry in front of this man. "My father, your father was a fool, and you're proving the apple doesn't fall far from the tree." Earl leaned in closer. "Sell that land, little girl. Sell it while it's still worth something. Because when those ditches of yours fill up with silt, and your crops fail, and you can't make your payments, no one around here is going to lift a finger to help you. We've got long memories in Hadley County. Your daddy made sure of that." He walked away, leaving Delia standing alone in the seed aisle, shaking. She bought the grass seed anyway. By October of 2016, Delia had completed the basic framework of her rainwater harvesting system. It wasn't pretty. The berms were rough. She was still learning how to operate the excavator properly, and her early work was uneven. Some of the swales were too shallow, others too deep. The retention pond at the bottom of the property was more of a muddy depression than a proper pond. But it was done. 9 crescent-shaped berms following the contours of her land, with shallow swales above each one, a network of channels connecting them, and that ugly, wonderful pond waiting to collect whatever overflow made it to the bottom. She planted winter wheat in her fields, one of the few crops she could afford to put in so late in the season. She used the money she had left after equipment rentals and seed purchases, which wasn't much. Then she waited. November brought rain, 2 inches over 3 storms. Delia watched from her porch as the water fell on her fields and stopped. It pooled in the swales, a thin silver line tracing each contour of the land. Slowly, over hours and days, it soaked into the soil. Her retention pond filled, not full, but fuller than she'd expected. Enough water that she could see the reflection of the sky in it. On her father's farm, before she'd built the system, that water would have run off within hours. It would have carried topsoil with it, adding to the erosion that had plagued the property for decades. Instead, it was going into the ground, recharging the soil, building reserves that her crops could draw on later. She took pictures and sent them to her mother, who didn't respond. She posted updates on an agricultural forum she'd joined, where farmers from around the world were experimenting with similar techniques. They offered encouragement, suggestions, technical advice. They became, in many ways, the community she didn't have in Hadley County. Winter came. The wheat went dormant under a thin blanket of snow. Delia spent the cold months planning, reading, preparing for spring. She applied for every small farm grant she could find. She was rejected by most of them. Her lack of experience counted against her. But she got 2. A $5,000 grant from a Sustainable Agriculture Foundation in California, and a $3,000 grant from a Women in Farming nonprofit. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep going. She also got something unexpected, a letter from the Kansas State University Agricultural Extension Program. A graduate student named Maria Santos was doing research on alternative water management techniques, and she'd heard about Delia's project. Would Delia be willing to participate in a study? Delia called her immediately. Yes, absolutely yes, please. Maria drove out the following week. She was young, maybe 25, with dark hair and an infectious enthusiasm for soil science. She took samples from Delia's fields and from neighboring properties. She measured infiltration rates, soil moisture levels, organic matter content. "This is remarkable," she said, looking at her instruments. "Your soil moisture is 40% higher than the control sites, after just a few months. Is that good? That's incredible. Your soil is holding on to water that would have run off anywhere else." She looked up at Delia with something like wonder. "Do you understand what you've done here?" Delia felt tears prick at her eyes again, but this time they were a different kind of tears. "I had a lot of help," she said. "From the internet mainly." Maria laughed. "The internet and about 1,000 hours of back-breaking labor." She gestured at the berms visible across the fields. "I've seen pictures of systems like this, but I've never seen anyone actually build one in the Kansas wheat belt. You might be the first." "Lucky me." "No, seriously." Maria's expression turned earnest. "This could change everything. If your system works, really works, it could revolutionize farming in this whole region. The Ogallala aquifer is depleting. Groundwater is running out. If we don't find alternatives—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Delia knew what was at stake. Everyone in Kansas farm country knew, even if they didn't want to admit it. The aquifer that had sustained agriculture on the Great Plains for generations was being drained faster than it could recharge. Wells were going dry. Water tables were dropping. Within a few decades, maybe sooner, the water simply wouldn't be there anymore. "I hope it works," Delia said. "I really do. Can I come back throughout the growing season? I want to document everything. Please, I could use the company." Maria became a regular visitor over the following months. She took measurements, photographs, and copious notes. She brought Delia books and research papers. She became, gradually, something like a friend. The first friend Delia had made in Kansas since returning. Spring arrived. The wheat came back to life, green shoots pushing up through the dark soil. Delia watched them grow with a mixture of hope and terror. Her neighbors were watching too. "Thornton wheat's looking thin," she heard at the diner. "No surprise, you can't grow a decent crop in a drainage ditch. Give it another month, she'll be drowning in mud or dead from drought, one or the other." But April brought rain, 3 inches over 2 weeks, and instead of flooding her fields, the water did exactly what it was supposed to do. It filled the swales, soaked slowly into the soil, and collected in the retention pond. Her wheat didn't drown. It flourished. May brought more rain, then a dry spell in June, then more rain in July. Delia's system was designed for exactly this pattern: feast or famine, flood or drought. The berms and swales smoothed out the extremes, capturing excess water when it was abundant and releasing it slowly when it was scarce. By August, her wheat was ready for harvest. She couldn't afford a combine, so she hired one, paying a premium because the only farmer willing to rent to her was from the next county over. Word of Ditch Digger Delia had spread, and no one in Hadley County would work with her. The combine rolled through her fields in the heat of late summer, and Delia followed behind in her truck, watching the golden wheat fall. When the tallies came in, she stared at the numbers in disbelief. Her yield was 62 bushels per acre. The county average that year was 47 bushels per acre. Her first year of farming with no experience, using a system that everyone said was crazy, and she had beaten the county average by 32%. She called Maria first. Then she called her mother, who actually answered this time. "I did it," Delia said, her voice cracking. "Mum, I actually did it." There was a pause on the line. Then her mother said, "Oh, honey, I'm so proud of you." It was the first time in years she'd heard those words from anyone in her family. You might think that Delia's successful first harvest would have changed things in Hadley County. You might think the farmers who had mocked her would reconsider their contempt. You would be wrong. If anything, her success made them resent her more. At the farm supply store, she overheard, "Beginner's luck. One good year doesn't prove anything," At the gas station, she got lucky with the weather. Wait till we get a real drought, then we'll see how those ditches work out. At the diner, I heard she cheated on her yield numbers. No way she got 62 bushels from that worn-out land. Robert Thornton couldn't get 40 on a good year. Earl Whitmore, the man who had confronted her months earlier, was particularly vocal. He told anyone who would listen that Delia's system was a scam, that she was lying about her yields, and that she would be bankrupt within 2 years. Mark my words, he said at a town council meeting. Delia heard about it afterward from Maria, who had heard it from a friend. That woman is a fraud, and when she fails, she's going to try to blame all of us for not helping her. That's what these city people do. They come in with their big ideas, they make a mess, and then they expect us to clean it up. The hostility was bewildering. Delia wasn't taking anything from these people. She wasn't competing with them for water rights or market share. She was just farming her own land, using her own methods. But she was doing it differently, and in Hadley County, different was dangerous. They're scared, Maria said during one of her visits. Change is terrifying to people who've built their whole identity around doing things a certain way. I'm not asking them to change anything, I'm just doing my own thing. That's exactly the problem. If your thing works better than their thing, what does that say about them? About their fathers and grandfathers who've been doing it the right way for generations? Maria shook her head. You're not just challenging their methods, you're challenging their whole sense of self. That seems like their problem, not mine. It is, but they're going to make it your problem anyway. She was right. Over the next year, Delia experienced a campaign of petty harassment that was clearly coordinated, even if no one would admit it. Her mailbox was knocked down 3 times. Someone dumped a load of trash at the entrance to her property. The local feed store suddenly couldn't get the specific seed varieties she ordered. Her insurance rates went up after an anonymous tip claimed she was engaged in experimental farming practices that increased risk. The bank that held her mortgage started sending letters about irregularities in her account, demanding additional documentation that took hours to compile. And everywhere she went, the whispers followed. Ditch Digger Delia, the city girl who thinks she knows better. Robert Thornton's crazy daughter. She kept her head down and kept working. In 2017, her second year of farming, she expanded the rainwater harvesting system to cover more of her property. She added a second retention pond. She planted native grasses on all the berms and watched them take root, their deep root systems stabilizing the earthworks and adding organic matter to the soil. She also diversified her crops. Instead of just wheat, she planted corn on 10 acres, soybeans on 15, and an experimental patch of sorghum, a drought-resistant grain that she thought might have potential in the region. Maria continued her study, documenting everything. Her thesis was coming together, a comprehensive analysis of rainwater harvesting as a climate adaptation strategy for Great Plains agriculture. You're going to be a case study, Maria told her. When I publish this, people are going to know about what you've done here. I'm not sure I want to be a case study. I just want to farm. You're doing both, whether you want to or not. The 2017 growing season was challenging. Rainfall was below average, only 22 inches for the year compared to the usual 28. Many farms in Hadley County reported lower yields. Some of the smaller operations started to struggle. But Delia's system had been storing water for 2 years now. Her soil moisture levels remained high. Her retention ponds were half full, providing emergency irrigation when she needed it. Her yields that year, 58 bushels per acre for wheat, 165 bushels per acre for corn, 48 bushels per acre for soybeans, all above county averages, all in a drought year. The whispers got quieter after that. Not gone, never gone, but quieter. Some of the younger farmers started driving past her property, slowing down to look at her berms and swales. They didn't stop to talk, but they looked. One of them, a man in his late 20s named Jake Morrison, actually stopped at the end of her driveway one afternoon. He didn't get out of his truck. He just sat there, looking at her fields. Delia walked down to meet him. "Can I help you?" Jake looked uncomfortable. "I was just looking." He paused. "My dad says you're crazy, but my wheat looks like hell this year, and yours looks—" He didn't finish the sentence. "You want to come take a look?" Delia offered. "I can show you how it works." Jake shook his head quickly. "No, I shouldn't even be here. He put his truck in gear. "My dad would kill me if he knew I stopped." "Your dad is Frank Morrison, Morrison Family Farms." Delia knew the name. Frank Morrison had been one of the loudest voices against her, second only to Earl Whitmore. "Your dad doesn't have to know," she said. Jake hesitated. For a moment, she thought he might actually accept her offer. Then, he shook his head again. "I can't, sorry." He drove away. But she noticed that he drove past her property several more times that summer, always slowing down, always looking. In 2018, the weather started to change. Not just in Hadley County. Across the entire Great Plains, the pattern that had sustained agriculture for generations was beginning to shift. Winters were warmer, springs were wetter, summers were hotter and drier. The neat, predictable rhythm of the farming calendar was becoming chaotic. That year brought flooding in the spring, 6 inches of rain in 3 weeks, followed by a brutal summer drought. Only 8 inches of rain fell between June and September. Across Hadley County, farmers watched their crops wilt under the relentless sun. Groundwater pumping increased dramatically as everyone tried to irrigate their way out of the crisis. Electricity bills soared. Water tables dropped another 2 feet. Delia's property, with its 2 years of water storage and its deep, moisture-rich soil, weathered the drought better than most. Her yields were down. You can't escape a drought entirely, but not catastrophically. 51 bushels per acre for wheat, 142 bushels per acre for corn. The county averages that year, 38 bushels for wheat, 121 bushels for corn. For the first time, people started to notice. "How is she doing it?" Delia heard at the diner. A different tone than before. Not mocking. Confused. Almost resentful. Must be pumping groundwater day and night. Running up debt to keep those crops alive. "I heard she doesn't even have an irrigation system. No well pumps at all." "That's impossible. Nobody farms without irrigation. Not in this climate." "I'm telling you what I heard." The drought of 2018 broke many farmers in Hadley County. 3 small operations filed for bankruptcy. 2 more sold out to larger farms. The consolidation that had been happening slowly across rural America accelerated locally as struggling families gave up land that had been in their families for generations. Delia watched it happen with a mixture of sympathy and frustration. These were her neighbors, her community, even if they didn't treat her like it. She knew the pain of losing family land. She didn't wish it on anyone, but she also couldn't help thinking, this didn't have to happen. If they had listened, if they had been willing to try something different, if they had built rainwater systems of their own, even small ones, even experimental ones. She kept those thoughts to herself. She had learned that offering advice to people who didn't want it only made things worse. Then 2019 arrived, the year that would change everything. Later, meteorologists would call it a once-in-a-century drought event. Climate scientists would point to it as evidence of the new normal, the kind of extreme weather that would become increasingly common as global temperatures rose. For the farmers of Hadley County, it was simply a disaster. It started in April. Normally the wettest month of the year, April 2019 brought less than half an inch of rain. May was worse, a 1/4 inch. June was bone dry, not a single measurable rainfall. By July, the corn that had looked so promising in early spring was stunted and brown. The wheat that should have been ready for harvest was thin, patchy,